Our moderator will be Smart Growth America's CEO and President, Calvin Gladney.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you, Martin, for those remarks. That was just awesome. I'm super excited to moderate this panel. It's a topic close to my heart. And actually, Martin, you know, I worked in California at Bridge Housing doing affordable housing throughout the state and really love what you've done and what you've grown. So thank you for sharing your insights and your wisdom. One of the things Martin said was the opposite of gentrification is economic segregation. And that just, I mean, lots of thoughts cascaded after I heard that in thinking about this panel and sort of setting it up. And it made me think, you know, we're not talking about anti-displacement. It's not just anti-displacement, as Martin talked about, but it's sort of pro-benefit. How can the existing residents actually get the benefit of everything that comes to a neighborhood when it revitalizes? It's not just about, as you can see from a lot of the different things that solar impact does, it's not just about new buildings, it's about wealth building. And you can see how small business development and doing things that focus on economic mobility, not just displacement, can get to that. And frankly, too, it's not just about Black and brown residents, but it's also about economic inclusion for Black and brown small businesses, too. And you can hear all of those into the kind of integrated approach that Martin talked about, and over the last 3 days, where if you really do want to advance racial equity, you really want to increase economic inclusion, you have to have this kind of comprehensive approach. And that leads me to this awesome panel today, because we have a panel of folks who understand all sides of this kind of economic inclusion equation. And so I'm excited to introduce everybody. They'll give a little more detail about themselves. You can see it on the screen as well. Our three terrific panelists are Michelle De La Uz. She's the executive director of the Fifth Avenue Committee, Inc. Give her a special shout out because I'm from Brooklyn as well, so I know exactly where she is. Marla Bilonick, who's president and CEO of the National Association of Latino Community Asset Builders. And finally, batting cleanup is Mayor Keith James, the mayor of West Palm Beach, Florida, who may have the best weather of the panel right now. Thank you everyone for being here today. To get things started, I'll actually turn to you, Michelle. That's not a Brooklyn bias, that's just the game plan today. Why don't you give us some background on the Fifth Avenue Committee's mission? It's sort of amazing work that you're doing in New York. And tell us how you're working to make equitable development happen and what results you're seeing.
First off, thanks so much for the invitation to be here and being with these great panelists. I really appreciate the invitation, Calvin. And I was definitely struck by our keynote. It's great to have socially conscious capitalists. And I was also quite honestly struck by what he said about the perception of risk by some of the philanthropic partners. And that left me wondering, honestly, whether or not that's just another form of institutionalized and systemic racism. So I just, not to start us off in a controversial way, but I have a few slides to kind of share a little bit about the Fifth Avenue Committee, and let me go ahead and pull those up. Oops, you were maybe seeing them and then it stopped, right? Okay, thank you. I think that's you guys and not me. Why don't we go ahead and move on? So Fifth Avenue Committee is in Brooklyn, New York. And last I checked, Brooklyn alone was the fourth largest city in the United States. And Fifth Avenue Committee is a comprehensive community development corporation and NeighborWorks America member. So a shout out to NeighborWorks, because I know they're a supporter of this event. And our mission is to advance economic, social, and racial justice. And we do that through a couple different means, and we can go on to the next slide. We do that through building and managing affordable housing and community facilities, and several other really what I call human service and human capital areas, and most importantly, organizing residents and workers. And our history is really one, we got started over 40 years ago out of the 20th century civil rights movement, and really in response to redlining locally. And so really the two pillars of our work, really focusing on bricks and mortar physical revitalization of the community, but doing so in a way where local residents were informing what decisions were being made, has really been a critical piece of our work throughout our history. And we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. I think a lot of folks are maybe familiar with New York City, population of 8.8 million people. That population grew by more than 600,000 over the last 10 years. And obviously an old industrial city. It's also by some, studies, the fourth most segregated city in the United States. And last night there were over 50,000 homeless New Yorkers. And that number's actually gone down during the pandemic. Partly because of an eviction moratorium and because of the number of people that are currently being sheltered in hotels. We're also home to the largest public housing authority in the country. This map you see here is of one particular community that I'm going to kind of focus on to, I think, help highlight some of the question that Calvin answered, and that's Gowanus, Brooklyn. And as you can see, the yellow in between there is the Gowanus Canal. It's the first US EPA Superfund site in the city of New York. And you can see that there are public housing developments on either side and multiple brownfield sites. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And the neighborhood is typical of a lot of old industrial areas. It's a real kind of hodgepodge of what's going on. We have active industrial uses adjacent to high density residential uses. The high rises you kind of see right past the low buildings with the water towers, that's public housing. And in this one neighborhood, there are multiple things going on, literally more than $500 million in environmental cleanups, multi-million-dollar investments going on in public housing. And, because it's a coastal community, it has suffered from flooding. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. This particular community, as I said, has a large number of public housing units, and as I said, New York City has over 174,000 families living in public housing. That's about 5% of the entire city population lives in public housing, and that public housing has a $40 billion capital needs gap. And so this neighborhood, Gowanus, is really striking in that we have multi-million-dollar brownstones immediately adjacent to folks that are paying about $500 or $600 a month in rent in very, very poor housing conditions. And so you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So when the former administration, the de Blasio administration, proposed that the Gowanus neighborhood would be one of 15 neighborhoods that it was going to rezone, that we wanted to ensure that those land use actions were going to result in benefits to the local and longtime public housing residents. And this neighborhood today is actually a majority white community, but just 16 years ago, it was a majority Latino community. And so other surrounding land use actions did cause a lot of that displacement that we were talking about and obviously want to avoid. And so Fifth Avenue Committee, which is based in Gowanus, we mobilized and we organized a neighborhood coalition called the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice. And one of the most important things when you're thinking about this work and working to make equitable development happen is really about being intentional and centering equity in the conversation. And that's exactly what we did by building a multiracial coalition. We can go ahead to the next slide. This is an example of one of our press conferences before the pandemic hit. That it's been really an incredibly powerful coalition. We preferenced in our process that public housing residents would have more voting power in our coalition. And our top 3 demands were upfront capital funding for public housing, which was technically outside of the rezoning map, investment in infrastructure to ensure that our sewage infrastructure was sufficient. We had over 300 million gallons of raw sewage going into the Gowanus Canal every year, if you can imagine. And then that we had accountability for the local investments that we wanted to see. And there were many investments around workforce development and small business and things like that as well. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And again, all of this was based on the fact, and part of what we did was a lot of community education and organizing. Folks didn't realize that the communities which surrounding communities, much of which is now gentrified, were previously redline communities. And what does it mean to rezone a previously redline community? How do we ensure that folks that have historically been outside of benefiting from development and change, that's an intentional part of what we do in this particular time, in this rezoning. And so go ahead and move on to the next slide. We did we contributed to doing the city's first racial impact study. That's New York City passed legislation this summer to require racial equity studies as part of all city-sponsored rezonings. Our particular rezoning was not going to be subject to that because its process started before the legislation passed. So we took it upon ourselves to do our own. And we were able to show that as part of the proposed rezoning, where 8,000 units of new housing are going to be developed, of which 3,000 will be affordable and permanently affordable and deeply affordable, that would actually help address segregation in the community. Really very, very important, and I think help to address a number of the concerns that some folks had about doesn't development equal displacement and cause future or more segregation. In this community, that's not the case. And then moving on to the next slide. Fifth Avenue Committee is actually co-developing one of the sites with 3 other public partners. We're going to be building 100% 950 unit affordable housing project, which will be deeply affordable. It's on a former manufactured gas plant site that's being remediated. And so this is one of the key projects that will be built as part of this project, as part of the Gowanus area-wide rezoning. And then moving on to the next slide. Again, you see our top 3 demands, and you see this rezoning was passed in November with over $200 million of investment committed to local public housing, nearly $200 million to local infrastructure, and a commitment for a local oversight task force, which will be created to oversee the 21 pages of points of agreement of commitment to the local community. Now, it took, I'll talk more, I think, in follow-up questions about how we got there and what does it take to, engage a diverse community in this process. But this is just one example. I think that's the end of our slides. This is just one example of one large land use action that Fifth Avenue Committee has been engaged in. There's been others, public-private proposal around Atlantic Yards, a $6 billion project, which if folks are interested, I'm happy to talk about. I know a lot of people are familiar with what happened with Amazon in Queens, another, private application. There's many, in all of these situations, and whether it's a public action, whether it's a private action, our main focus is to ensure that local folks, local low and moderate income, mostly Black and brown folks who are going to be impacted by public policy are front and center in informing what the solutions are, and that it's local community needs that are informing the decisions that are happening, whether that's to support a modified proposal or, quite honestly, to not support it and ensure that it doesn't happen. So we're pro equitable development, not anti-development. I'll pass it over back.
Michelle, thank you for those remarks. So we started almost in a sense hyper-local, looking at Michelle's perspective and point of view to the Gowanus neighborhood in Brooklyn. Now let's go up a couple of levels, and I'm going to take this to Marla. Marla, you have a background both kind of as a regional leader and advocate on community revitalization here in the Washington, D.C., the DMV area, and now as a national leader, both focused on parts of regionally in the Southwest and located there, but also nationwide. So wanted you to kind of first give us a little bit of background about NALCAB, remind us what the acronym stands for, and well as, can you specifically talk about opportunities and challenges for economic inclusion when it comes to Latino communities and what they need to do to get to financial independence, as well when they face the same questions that Michelle talked about in Gowanus? How are there any particularly unique issues for those population as well?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Calvin. Just want to make sure that my audio is good because we have been having challenges. Awesome. Thank you. And I also wanted to just say thank you so much for including me and NALCAB in this event. NALCAB is the National Association for Latino Community Asset Builders. And really, it's a somewhat complicated name to just say that we are a membership organization of almost 160 nonprofits working in the economic development space all over the US, including DC and Puerto Rico. And we, everything that Michelle was talking about really resonated to me, both as a former practitioner, direct service provider on the ground in Washington, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and Puerto Rico, as well as kind of in my new capacity, seeing this bird's eye view of what our members are experiencing on the ground in their communities, whether it be North, South, East, West, Midwest. There are so many commonalities for better and worse. And so just wanted to speak a little bit about that. The other sort of thread between our membership that may be obvious from our name is that most of our members, or all of our members, are working in predominantly Latino communities, and most of our members are Latino-led organizations. And so the point of view is somewhat narrow from that point of view. But with regard to equitable neighborhood development, I did want to just point out that NALCAB has kind of, through cohorts of members, developed a methodology around predicting gentrification, as well as we've put together a bunch of publications about cases of different urban areas that you can see. It will be linked in the chat. I did also want to make a quick plug, and I'll put that in the chat myself when I am off the stage, virtual stage, which is that we actually have a webinar today at 2 p.m. Eastern that is announcing grant that we have for equitable neighborhood development projects. And so it is for NALCAB members, but if you think you might be eligible to be a NALCAB member, you could become a member to access this opportunity. And it is with funding from JP Morgan Chase. So just wanted to put that out there because folks who are working in communities could find that of interest. But as far as NALCAB's approach, we developed a tool to anticipate gentrification. I think predict might be a little bit too strong of a word, but we are looking at 5 indicators. So median home value, median contract rent, median household income, population over 25 years with at least a Bachelor of Arts, and number of white non-Hispanic residents. And when in a neighborhood, any of those indicators skews significantly from the rest of the city, we have found that to be kind of like a telling signal that gentrification is coming. And I think I believe that my co-panelists would agree, what's really challenging about gentrification and working in gentrifying communities is that gentrification happens very quickly. And I'm sure everyone would agree that the pandemic accelerated gentrification. At the same time, the interventions around either preventing displacement or once it's happening, kind of slowing it or stopping it, take a lot of time. And so there's a mismatch between sort of the challenge and the solution. And so I think that's something that, you're constantly playing catch up to get, to keep folks in their homes and in their businesses. The other thing I wanted to point out about the way that we have approached our member cohorts that are working in this space of equitable neighborhood development is we've found kind of 4 pillars that can help to slow or stop displacement. So one is community organizing and education. We certainly saw that in Michelle's case. Promoting land and commercial space ownership, increasing incomes to the extent that we can influence that, and impacting policies. So those are kind of the avenues that we take. And then to answer your question, Calvin, because I know I've provided a lot of background there, with regard to sort of the most pressing issues that our community faces, and again, this is very broad brush, and I don't intend to speak on behalf of my entire community, but what we have seen as trends, particularly with the pandemic, there has been a lot of loss of livelihood. So assets like businesses, jobs, homes, these have all been disproportionately palpable in the Latino community. Actually, Latinas were the largest group to leave the workforce. And so for so many reasons that impacted so many of us, whether that was lack of childcare, loss of job, or the impossibility of balancing the two. We also went into the pandemic as the largest or fastest growing group of startup businesses, so the fastest growing group to start businesses. And of course, the pandemic derailed that. An interesting point is that Latinos actually have continued to increase homeownership even through the pandemic. So that's a positive indicator that, just kind of a peculiar, wonderful thing that is there. But I would sort of see those as challenges. And of course, as eviction moratoria are lifted, we really foresee that there will be challenges around housing and vulnerability just around housing, whether that's rental housing or home-owned housing. I think you're on mute, Calvin.
Thank you so much for that. And that's a kind of helpful contrast. So Mayor James, I want to get into your cell phone. I want to get into your email. I want to get into your text messages and DMs. So, you're getting communications from folks like Michelle, who are community advocates, focused on, in particular, a neighborhood, a certain geography, and a diverse population, but particularly to a neighborhood. But you're also getting calls and emails from texts from strong leaders like Marla, who have a regional and national perspective, but also are focused on neighborhoods that have a predominant demographic population. Can you, one, give us a little bit of background on West Palm Beach? Don't make any weather references, because I know how you do. But can you give us a sense of, when you're a mayor, when you're a political leader, and there's many political leaders and policymakers in the audience today, how do you balance these different stakeholders and constituencies, particularly in the context of equitable placemaking?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And I'm honored to be on this panel with such strong advocates and capable advocates. West Palm Beach is a little bit of background. We're a city of about 116,000. We've grown 16% in the last decade. No weather references, but it's a city that is growing very rapidly. And I think not to a tremendous cause of that growth has been the pandemic. And I hesitate to say anything good coming out of the pandemic when you've had over 800,000 people who've lost their lives, and we should never lose sight of that. But the move to remote working, our attractive tax base, we don't have a state income tax, we don't have a local income tax, And yes, the weather has certainly made us attractive, particularly to industries from the north, fintech, hedge funds, bankers, investment banking, to come down here, do their jobs from the comfort of their homes. But to get to your question, and it is a very challenging one, because we do have in our city, and West Palm Beach historically grew up, was established as where the servants to the rich who resided in Palm Beach lived. So we have a number of neighborhoods that were predominantly Black, predominantly brown, and that's where the servants housed, the butlers, the maids, and others who served the uber rich, who lived across the bridge over in the town of Palm Beach. So with our tremendous growth, and the town of Palm Beach has some very strict caps on growth. So while the uber rich would live over there, when they wanted to establish their businesses and needed a place to house these multi-billion-dollar companies, West Palm Beach became the place. So there's a tremendous rush, land rush, if you will, for Class A commercial office space. Developers are building buildings. I mean, the cranes are just all up in the air. How do we make that growth? How do we make the benefits of that growth inclusive? That's my challenge as the mayor. I can easily sit back and by the way, I'm what they call a strong mayor under our charter. I am literally the CEO of the city. So the buck stops with me. So I could have sat back and just realized, been happy that we're growing as a city. We're getting more attention from developers and businesses that want to come and make West Palm Beach home. But I took it upon myself, and obviously it wasn't, we're motivated, all of us are motivated by what came out of the pandemic. 2020 was, 1928, 1968, all wrapped up in one. And certainly the cries and the protests and the demonstrations in the streets for social and racial justice certainly made us sensitive to that. But to me, it was very important that not only do we grow as a community, but that we become a community, and that the benefits of this growth were inclusive. So as I get these calls and as I entertain proposals for projects, it is up to me and my team to see how do we insert benefits for those who have been without and who have been left behind in prior economic spurts. And it's a challenge, it remains a challenge. There's a quirk of timing because these companies are all talking the EDI talk, equity and inclusion. And so we were trying to get them to walk the walk as well. And I will shut up because I know we have a limited amount of time, but hopefully that answered your question.
No, I love that. Walking the walk and instead of just talking the talk. And I know Michelle has probably said that to a number of people over the years. She smiled when you said it. Wanted to maybe go a little rogue and just pose one question. There's a lot of questions in the Q&A, so we have a lot of content there. But pose a question that kind of goes to all of you, and you guys can just decide in this sort of speed round before we go to general questions. What is most important to do first? When we think about community revitalization, there's, and us as smart growthers, we're always challenged with, you want to think of all of this in an interdisciplinary, interconnected way to kind of get to these equitable outcomes. But you start to realize at some point, there's questions about transportation, land use, economic development, small business. And it's sort of like, well, if we have finite resources, capacity, and time, what should we do first? What do you see as the priority that creates that domino effect, that spillover effect that then could get you to the outcomes that we all seek. I want to just pose that to all three of you. And whoever wants to go first can raise their hand. Marla, jump in.
I think the absolute first thing that has to happen is engagement of the community. I think that these efforts are most successful when they're community driven. I think most people in communities are on board to, preserve their resources. And so, I'm thinking specifically to a program that that my organization prior to NALCAB led in Montgomery County, Maryland, where really like the most essential piece of the project was that we had an individual who basically reported to work in the business corridor and just spent the entire day with business owners, organizing them, informing them, educating them. And that, to me, that was like the X factor that made that program work. And actually the businesses that were threatened in that community by a government building that was going up, they're all still there, even after COVID. And they're also still there, way outperforming just the general baseline business performance. So that's my 2 cents.
And I want to say something that's implied in there, and then I'll go to Michelle next. They went to the businesses during the workday. So they didn't have an 8 p.m. meeting in a school basement in the neighborhood where small business owners, who oftentimes are the people that spend more hours of the day in the community on the weekdays than anyone else, but all of the engagement is designed for folks who can be there at night or be to certain places. So that's, I just want to.
And it was on site. It was on site at their business. They didn't even have to step out. So,
meet them where they are and when they're there. Michelle, let me give it to you.
That was my number 1 as well, but I would say my number 2 then is setting intentionality around equity and addressing inequality. Like that, like you have to state it, and you have to kind of talk about the history of how we got to wherever we are as an important piece of it.
Oh, Mayor James, I'm going to bridge off of that and ask you a specific question. There are some in this space who feel like if we spend too much time talking about the history, and I imagine as a Black mayor, this tension comes up. Well, if you talk too much about the truth and what actually happened and redlining and disinvestment, then we'll never get to the solutions. And I just want to focus on the future and solutions. Can you talk a little bit about that tension? And again, what would be your priority if you had to start somewhere?
Well, the interesting thing is, in response to the demonstrations and the protests and the energy in the streets, I put together a task force, a mayor's task force on equity. And I wanted it, and its mission was threefold. It's interesting you had that question. The mission was threefold. First was to definitely take an honest, hard look at the history of West Palm Beach, and listen, no matter how many New Yorkers come down here, we are still a small town in the South, okay? And all that comes with that from a race relations standpoint, yes, that is part of our history. But it was important not to say, and I had 25 people from throughout a very diverse group, ethnic group, professions, small businesses, et cetera, that I handpicked to serve on this task force. And I told them, look at the history, don't stay stuck there, and begin to understand and look at best practices from other areas. And we had 5 pillars. It was in real estate, it was in workforce development, it was in healthcare, and I'm missing a couple for the sake of time. Anyone can go to our website. And anyway, but to, yes, do an honest appraisal, get an honest look at the history, look at, for each of these pillars, some best practices from around the country. How do we do better, right? Understand what we've done, how can we be better? And then make specific policy proposals to me and the commission. And so that work, that was going on hand in hand. And quite frankly, I think the fact that I created this task force has helped me in my conversations with these businesses that are looking to relocate or establish a presence in West Palm Beach. because I said, listen, this is what I'm doing as the CEO of the city. I need partners in this work. And it made that conversation easy. But to get to the priority and where do we start with this? As the mayor, as someone who's looking at an entire city and not just a particular neighborhood, to me, to some degree, I'm reacting, right? Developers will come to my door and say, we've got this great project. What do you think? And so I react to that opportunity, but then I have to take the next step and be intentional as to how do I make that opportunity one that is equitable. And so then my team and I, we have to huddle internally and say, all right, if this opportunity comes, we need it to look like X. And then we negotiate, but you can never, and my two colleagues on the dais are very accurate, we have to engage the community. We have to engage the community early on. And so what we tell the developer is, before you go any further, you need to go into these neighborhoods that you will be affecting. You need to educate them and get them involved. This is not something you're just going to helicopter in and dump on them. You need to educate them and make them partners in this process. And so that's part of it. But we also have to look at the macro issues. We have transportation issues. We have education issues that we need to work on above and beyond a particular proposal. So and where I sit, it's I have to know how to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, I'm going to bring my colleague, Chris Zimmerman, in to help field some questions. And it makes me think all that you said kind of can get boiled down to 3 E's when it comes to advancing racial equity. It's not just the engagement, which is important, but also the education and the empowerment. And if you can get all 3 of those together, that's where you're really moving the ball forward. Chris Z, what do you know from the audience?
Well, as you'd expect, we have a bunch of really good questions. I'm going to start with one that brings together pretty much, the issues that we've been talking about since Tuesday, which the viewer asks, how does equity, climate resiliency, and economic development intersect for your city? And I think that can be probably for any of our panelists.
Wow, I'm going to start with Michelle just because the Gowanus Canal project probably brings all of those issues together at once.
I think it's those 3 things are present in everything. Obviously New York City is a coastal city. Again, it's, by some measures, the 4th most segregated city in the country. So I think it's also kind of viewed as the real estate capital globally. And, there's a history of real estate representing a form of extraction in New York City. And so you have to kind of, bring equity and the focus on climate justice to all the conversations to ensure and to inform public policy to ensure that economic development is equitable. And I think there's really good organizing that is going on in local communities. There are incredible citywide and statewide coalitions that are pushing legislation and have been successful in passing legislation that really tie these things. And there's really, honestly, a movement towards comprehensive planning, which we'll see if that actually can be passed under the new council that just was sworn in on January 1st. So I think there's an awareness that they're inextricably linked, and we need to focus on all 3 simultaneously. You can't sacrifice one for the other.
I'm going to take a moderator's privilege and keep going to different questions just so we can get some variety. I will note, for those who didn't enjoy our first day of the summit, a lot of the conversation and our keynote speaker for our land use panel did talk about issues of climate resiliency, adaptation, and the like. So if you haven't seen that, go back and check out the recording. Chris, what else do you know?
Well, we've got a question about transportation. And this one was intended for Mayor James, which was, has transportation, or is it playing a role in equitable development in West Palm Beach?
Yes, absolutely. And transportation is a regional issue for us. It's something that we struggle with. Geographically, West Palm Beach is the capital city. It's the largest city in our county, and it tends to be a magnet for businesses. We've got the county seat here. We have the courthouses, federal as well as state and county, and so that we get a tremendous influx of people coming in every day at 9 to 5. And Florida has been, and unfortunately continues to be, very auto-centric. And so our desire, and since I've been on the commission, and I was on the commission for 8 years before becoming mayor, is to figure out a way to efficiently move people and not just cars. But there's blowback there because people are very accustomed and very comfortable in their cars, but they will also complain about traffic, right? When they get caught in a traffic jam, then they're complaining about traffic. But anyway, so that continues to be a challenge, and we're looking for ways. Now, the city itself has an extensive trolley system, which is free, which moves people certainly from some of these underserved neighborhoods into our urban core. So that's a step in the direction of how do we equitably move people around, but it continues to be a challenge. We're trying to become more of a walkable city. I said we were a city of about 116,000. We have close to 10,000 people who now live downtown, and so there's more of a desire to live, work, and entertain without moving the cars. And certainly this younger generation, and I can say that because I've got 2 kids in their 30s, they don't own cars because that is their mindset. You know, I can Uber, I can walk, I can catch a cab. So anyway, so that continues to be an issue and a challenge. And we're hoping to move toward more of a mobility fee kind of structure where the developers, when they're coming in, will pay into this system of mobility fees and help us to finance some of these transportation projects.
Thanks for that answer. Actually, Chris, let's see if there's any other question that might have a distinct topic to it that maybe we can direct it towards Marla, depending on the question.
Well, there was a question that somebody asked to direct to Marla, which was, does Marla have suggestions on how to tell the difference between positive growth and change and gentrification?
Oh, they left you with the easy one.
I'm going to cure cancer and then I'll get back to you on that one. No, so, I don't know. I think it's somewhat repetitive of what I said in terms of like what the first thing that should be done in terms of engaging community, because I think that a lot of times when there is rapid change, it's above the heads of the current residents, current business owners. It's totally designed for whoever the anticipated next entrant into the community is going to be. And so I think positive change is one where, and you said this, Calvin, very eloquently at the beginning of our session, is, positive change is one where the current residents and business owners in a community stand to benefit from the changes that are going to be taking place. So it's not that they're kind of a placeholder while, things are being constructed for a next beneficiary, but they are really involved in designing and influencing sort of what the changes are going to be so that they're responsive to their needs, their wants, as well as potentially attractive to others who want to come in. But connecting those two end beneficiaries, I think, is critical.
That's awesome. I want to add one point to this, which I think needs to get illuminated more often, which is one way to look at positive growth is not just about economics. It's making sure that there isn't cultural erasure when new people come in. Because one thing that can happen is there might not be any displacement at all the residents stay, but they feel like this neighborhood is no longer for us. I don't see any of the small businesses that I used to patronize all these decades. I see things coming to the neighborhood that seem to benefit the neighborhood in general, but more specifically benefit the new residents, not me. You know, whether it's murals, whether it's different types of food, different types of services. I think part of what we need to think about, and this is the harder stuff, is how do we make sure that when we create and revitalize neighborhoods so they're more vibrant, there's a mix of uses and there's lots of different people, that they're also authentic places, so that you don't go there and it's like, it looks like it has no history, like it just started yesterday. And so I think that that ability to create a kind of cultural awareness of the original identity of the neighborhood is an important other thing to think about in terms of growth that sort of gets out of the economics of it. I think we have a chance for one last question, and it'll be a speed round. I'll probably direct it to one person.
Well, okay, so one question we have is, if a neighborhood plan is developed, what are the most effective economic development items? A task list or a project list with costs, a policy asked to electeds? I think you're looking for advice here.
Michelle.
I mean, I'm biased because my organization also does workforce development and training program. We train and place over 900 unemployed and underemployed New Yorkers every year into family supporting jobs. And I think we don't invest enough in people. And so I would say a robust workforce and workforce development and adult education, literacy and bridge programming is a key piece of any economic development to ensure that it's inclusive.
Thank you. Mayor James or Marla, any other concluding thoughts on that? You just put something in the chat, Marla, that I think is worth saying out loud.
Yeah, I know we're short on time, so I didn't want to hop in, but just the point that you were making is so critical, because we've found that immigrant-owned businesses are not only providing the goods or services that they're selling, and not only the huge piece, which is the livelihood for the owners and the workers, but they also tend to be social hubs. So that's where people get information about what's going on in the school system, or that's where people get information about local politics. So it's really more than just, you know, a business. So I just wanted to point that out.
You know, you talked about preserving the culture of a community. I know this goes back to an earlier comment. That's where community engagement comes in. If you talk to the folks who are residing and working in that community, many times they could tell you, they'll have the historical perspective that I think is important to preserve.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I'm going to pass it back to Chris for a couple of comments about resources, and also to thank the panel.
Okay, sorry, am I on here? Let's see. We do have some recommended reading from our panelists that we wanted to share. And you can see on the slide on the screen now, and also in the chat what those are. We're also going to share some resources from Smart Growth America, both on the screen and in the chat. And these are some publications that you might be interested in that touch on many of the topics we've discussed today and this week. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Calvin to close out the summit.
Thank you, Chris. And again, thank you, Mayor James, Marla, and Michelle, just for your awesome insights and just sharing your vision and for doing what you do. Just wanted to close out the entire summit and just thanking all of you for spending the time. You could be anywhere in the world and you decided to spend your time with us today and over the last 3 days. So thank you so much. Couple of just quick announcements. The full video recordings of each day will be wrapped soon, working as we speak, and we'll hopefully have all of them by the end of the week. So tell your friends, tell your colleagues when you heard something awesome that they can, even if they missed it, get access to those video resources. We're also, in terms of resources, we're going to create discussion guides where each day of the summit, you can basically think about actions you can take. And there'll also be a compilation of the resources that are mentioned each day by panelists and attendees. So we create these discussion guides so that again, this isn't just a one-off event, that it actually gives you something tangible. So we'll send all of those things to your inbox as soon as possible. So please stay tuned. You know, one thing that was in the chat, and we love you too, ISG office. I saw somebody said, we love you, SGA. One of the things that we keep getting asked is, well, you had me on hello. What can I go do? I'm gonna go do something. Well, let me give you one thing to go do. We wanna get your feedback. We wanna get your comments. We wanna get your thoughts. So we're gonna send all of you a brief survey about the summit. We're gonna put that link in the chat now about the summit, and we'll also include it in an email for you soon. And we'll really appreciate hearing your feedback. And actually, just as an incentive for you to fill it out, we're gonna give away copies of our keynote speaker, Majora Carter's new book, to 10 attendees who complete the survey. So get your survey responses in today. It'll be a random drawing, but her book is awesome. And hopefully that adds a little bit extra for you to get the survey done. In our post-summit email, we're also going to ask you questions about what you learned, and you'll get a chance to get Majora's book as well. So stay tuned for that. This is a quick closeout. Wanted again just give a couple of quick shout outs to our sponsors, and we thank them for all of their support and help us bring all of this awesome content and panelists today. Thank you to Citi, our event sponsor. Wanted to thank our presenting sponsors as well, which are City Health and NeighborWorks America. And again, give a special shout out to our overall closed captioning sponsor, AARP, who, you know, over the course of the days, as you can see, our ASL interpreters, our closed captioning, and really us trying to walk the walk in terms of making this equitable, not just in terms of demographics, but have this event be accessible as many people as possible. And we look forward to your feedback on how we could even do better on that. Thank you to all of our tremendous speakers over the course of 3 days for being here with us. You can see all the visuals. Definitely shout them out on Twitter, the folks that you found most awesome. Speakers, we thank you and grateful for your presence. And we see some of you in the chat, so you got so energized that you came back for more. Thanks for the insights and wisdom. We couldn't have done this without you. Speaking of that, I just want to say a special, I'm going a little bit rogue. I just want to give a shout out to the Smart Growth America team. There's so many people behind the scenes that did a lot to make this event happen. And I just want to thank all of them for everything that they do. And I want to give one special shout out to Rayla Bellis, who just doesn't get as much credit. And I want to give you credit to all of the country. Just thank you for your extra quarterbacking efforts over the course of 3 days and the many days and nights before that. Finally, thank you for joining us this week. And I just want you to remember one thing as you go forward. There is no such thing as equitable smart growth. Smart growth is equitable growth. Thank you, take good care, and take care of others. Bye now.